And I think that it's been something that people have been wanting to know. They want to hear from their candidates. They want to know what we think and why we're doing what we're doing and why we're just crazy, one of those things. So anyway, my name is Emily McIntire. I am 41. I am a mom of 2. My son is here, my youngest is 13, my oldest is 19. My husband is here. I have lived in Jackson County my whole life. I was born in Trail, lived in Medford for a couple years where my parents figured out what they wanted to do and then moved back to Eagle Point. So my husband and I have been married for almost 16 years, and he has been a lifelong pizza business owner. So we've been in the pizza business for the last, 16 years, 25 or 30 for him, I don't know. But so my why, 6 years ago, my son was in elementary school, and this school district had just released a 1-to-1 iPad ratio. And that means that every child K through 12 got an iPad. And initially it was a wonderful thing. Kids had access, kids that didn't have it, it was great. And then I spent an afternoon playing around on my son's iPad and realized that it was completely open. The internet was completely open to my first grader who could access anything he wanted. And granted, my first grader's not going to be able to access stuff because he can't really spell or read at that point, but there's 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders that can. And so that kind of started my passion down the political journey. I realized that I had the ability to do something about that, and I did. And so I ran for school board, and I won, and then we were able to implement a real-time internet control for each child. So they were able to, if they accessed something they weren't supposed to access, it went right in and it got nipped in the bud right away. And so I've been in education for the last 6 years, and the last 2.5, 3 with COVID have been a heartbreaker for me, and really what pushed me into this. Not only have we seen businesses take a huge hit with COVID, not only have we seen just complete overregulation of what we have had in our freedoms, but our education system and what we did to our kids, in my mind, is I'll just say really, really horrible. We're now struggling with kids that used to be maybe a year and a half behind, are now a solid 3 years behind. And we're requiring their teachers to teach them at grade level and expecting to pass them through to the next grade. And it breaks my heart. And I see nothing coming out of Salem that's going to fix that. So education was one of my big yeses. The other thing is, when you talk to people in the state, is everybody's suffering. I listened to a call for OHA giving testimony on masking, and it was an 8 or 9 hours of testimony whether or not we were going to do a permanent masking rule. And there was not one person from any walk of life on that call that said they wanted to maintain that permanent masking rule. And again, it just showed me that the people in Salem are not listening to what their community members are wanting. They're not listening to what the citizens are asking for. They're saying, I know better than you, and you're gonna do what I tell you to do. And again, I said, no, we're not gonna do this. I'm a firm believer. I had no idea how to run for political office, and the Lord opened every door for me to be here today, and for that, I am truly grateful. So again, my name is Emily McIntire. I'm running for District 56. It's White City up to Crater Lake and cuts Klamath Falls in half. So that's where it's at. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Chenjeri. I'm a candidate for House District 56. I'm a teacher, union member, organizer in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I've been here about 5 years. I was raised in Oregon as well, born in California. Our campaign that we're organizing is about a new deal for rural Oregon, which means bringing some of the benefits and some of that chunk of change that Salem has back to rural areas. Before I talk about that, I do want to acknowledge that this is kind of a unique position that we're in. I don't think we've had an actual debate for political office in 10+ years, besides forums and some local city councils. So I would pledge myself that I would be willing to come back and have a debate in the next election cycle. And I do applaud the integrity of my candidate for to be up here and debate these issues. I can't say that we agree on all the issues, but I do respect her integrity. Our New Deal program is about approaching the serious, the isolation that rural areas experience. Isolation in terms of access to healthcare, educational opportunities, employment opportunities, and that isolation that is usually due to geographic factors. Some of those things that we don't always take into account if you live on the other side of the hill. And so with that, we hope that we can bring all the stakeholders in the community, union members, workers, the business community, the education community, and those in the homeless community that may not have some of the access that we might have. Bring them together to have a discussion about what type of development we want. We can, working together, have an OHB healthcare model that benefits everybody. And we can start on that by voting yes on Measure 111. We can take seriously the compounding effects of poverty in rural areas. And we can start by building on the Project Turnkey programs. That is a pathway forward, and we see some of that benefit in the Klamath Basin, where I'm from. We can invest in rural artists. We can develop the culture economy of our region. We can take climate change and our needs in the environment seriously, and work to invest in the water issues we have. We can pay farmers to help slowly transition to renewable sources. We can take seriously the indigenous knowledge and practices that a lot of our areas have and include that in our development models. We can protect the right for women to choose the basic fundamental rights over one's body. And in that, not only protecting the right to choice, but expanding access in the rural areas. And we can also be defenders of the First Amendment by investing in local journalists so we don't have rural news deserts anymore. We can protect the right of students and teachers to learn and think for themselves. That's fundamental to when we talk about the Constitution. With that, I hope as we go forward, we can have a conversation about the future we want for rural Oregon and how we can bring all the stakeholders together. Thank you.
So that's our introduction. And now we have a set of 3 questions. These questions the candidates have known about in the past because they are on our Vote 411 site. So I'll ask each question and then we'll alternate the answers. Who goes first? The first to answer on this question will be Jonathan Chenjeri. So describe what you see as the 2 most pressing issues for the next legislative session. What legislation would you propose to address these issues? So Jonathan, please.
Thank you. The question is a little complicated because we're forced to reduce it to 2 issues. So in the last legislative cycles, a lot of the focus was, of course, on COVID. A lot of it was on the fires, most recently in the Jackson County area. And in that, we've had a lot of legislation trying to focus on how do we deal with this in the future? Because the trends, and while we have had a mild fire cycle recently, or season rather, the trends are not going in the best direction in terms of safety. And so I think the best way to capture is my 2 issues would be with infrastructure and dealing with climate change. When we talk about infrastructure, we have to have a broader sense of what we mean by that, because we know that building a bridge or building a school is necessary. But if you don't have a labor source, the people to work in there that are struggling outside of that place, the work being done won't work. So we need to, with infrastructure, invest in people and places. So with that, we should be building on Measure 111 to expand Medicare and Medicaid access, hopefully going toward a universal healthcare system. We need to have a minimum wage that doesn't disenfranchise rural areas. Some of the more progressive legislation has been talking about a $17 minimum wage. That would help develop the workforce here. We should be talking about childcare and making that much more accessible for working families. If you have to spend half your paycheck and work multiple jobs to get to work, it's not going to make the businesses and our schools and all the rest of the work complete. And we can talk about housing and sustainable developments in that way. And we see a lot of that happening in the Klamath Basin of rural Oregon. That's an opportunity, but we need support from the state and federal level. We should be building on the Build Back Better programs. That's what's happening at the federal level. There is money there, but unfortunately, my friends on the other side will vote against it, then take credit for it when it does come to our areas. We can have a public option for broadband. It's possible, but we need to make it much easier for local city governments to take that control. And when we talk about places, we can think about alternatives when it comes to homelessness and housing issues, such as shared housing units and tax credits for those looking to build co-op models. With that, I'll leave those two issues there.
So I agree with Jonathan. This was hard to just pick two. So the top two that I did go ahead and choose was ballot measure 110. Ballot measure 110 was where we decriminalized personal size use of cocaine, heroin, and the bad ones. I'm trying to think of the other one, I'm blanking. And we're seeing homelessness and drug abuse running rampant through our state. And these are not just all of our friends and neighbors, but these are people from other places in the nation that saw that they could have drugs, and not only drugs, but they could have needles be provided to them, and they could live anywhere they wanted with essentially zero consequence. And it's lowering our house values. It is creating unsafe neighborhoods. There's crime running rampant, and it's not loving. Leaving people in their addiction is not loving them. That's hate. And so I see us, if not repealing ballot measure 110 completely, definitely amending it. There was $304 million that were designated for ballot measure 110. Only about 36 million has been spent. It was spent recently. It was put out so quickly that these agencies that didn't even know they were going to get money got money. Once the money came out, they didn't know what to do with it. And so it was kind of like, you take it, you take it. It was so disorganized, and that's our money. That's our tax dollars. If we want to help people, we will help them get out of their addiction, get back to their families, and lead productive lives. I have yet to meet an addict who says, I loved being an addict. I want to go back to it. So my other one would be homelessness, or not homelessness, a housing crisis. We in this state, through Senate Bill 100, we have an urban growth boundaries map that our state chose to implement. It means there's only certain sections that we can actually put housing, and then the rest is left for rural. It's all designated what it can and cannot be in the state completely. It's already done. It was done years ago. And when you have urban growth boundaries, you have inflated housing costs. And that's why we see right now that housing costs are through the roof. To build a medium-sized home now for a middle income, it's $402,000. That's with zero profit. Who can afford that? Some of us can, but certainly not the majority of the state. So the other thing with all of our, and the housing thing goes into multiple things. Our building contractors, our state, we're so overregulated with additional costs because of our climate change initiative. It has raised all of the costs in the state to be able for our builders to be actually able to afford their products. So those two things, and I'm stopping.
Thank you. Our second question, you have already addressed some of it, but I think there's a lot more to say on the subject of education. The question is, what should the legislature do to improve the quality of Oregon K-12 public schools? So the first speaker is Emily.
3 minutes is not enough. We need more time. We need a big round table. We all need to talk about this, right? This is a big deal. So where to start? There's a difference between equality and equity. Equality is giving every child the same opportunity, and equity is meeting them where they're at. Our current public school system needs to be blown up and started over. The standards that we have, the expectation that we have for our teachers to teach in 1 year with these kids is ridiculous. So I probably have 2 minutes now. So we'll just start taking it off. We can't solve every family problem, which breaks my heart, because kids don't get to choose the family that they're put into. And these kids deserve the best, right? So we've got to give them everything that we can at school. And I'm looking at an educator right now who loves these kids in this district with her whole entire heart. And she is one of the reasons that I am up here today. So we need to get parents involved back in the classroom. We need parents to know what's going on in their education system. We need them to get involved and invested in their schools and with their kids. We need parents to know how important it is for them to read to their kids, to do homework with their kids, to hold their kids accountable in school. We need parents in the school. We need to stop treating every child like they are a perfect little heart-shaped cookie and that they're going to be able to learn everything because they fit in this little heart-shaped box that we cram them into. We need to be able to meet kids where they are at. And this state doesn't like to do grouping where we do kind of a low, middle, and high. We think that that's emotionally damaging for kids. It's actually really hard for kids that know that they can't meet the standard that they're being taught. And so they either sit there and throw pencils at their neighbor, they act out, they give up, or they just sit there silently and they get passed by. We need to do better. So if we can look at changing the way that we teach so that we can teach to where the child is at, that is equal and actually equitable. And this is going to take a lot. This is no small project. This is a huge project. We need to look at ODE as an agency, and we need to clean house. We need to hold people accountable that are supposed to be doing their jobs. We have gotten ourselves in this mess because we have remained silent, but no more. I look at these faces in this room and we're ready, right? We're ready to hold the state accountable, not for us, but it's for our kids, it's for their kids, and it's for their kids, and so on. We owe it to this state to be having educated kids.
Thank you. Well, I am an educator in the classroom. I teach at a high school. I teach history, which is the current hot button topic. In the 1990s, the concern was multilingual or multicultural education, excuse me. And the concern was that, students are learning about history from different perspectives. And sometimes those perspectives cut across the grain, what we're usually comfortable with or used to. Presently, the focus has been on CRT, or comprehensive sex education. CRT, which is an acronym for critical race theory, which is usually a legal theory taught to PhD students. And that's oftentimes what I hear on the other side of the concern, being that I, as a teacher, am walking into my classroom and telling all my white students that they're racist by virtue of being real white. That's the concern. And oftentimes when our class does have a discussion about this, they kind of laugh, and I kind of laugh, because we look at our curriculum, we look at what we're actually talking about, and we see that oftentimes the message is quite opposite. But when it comes to education, there are serious issues, and those serious issues tend to do with a lack of resources. We talk about school teachers who have expanding class sizes with less resources to teach the students. We don't often have the time to reach all the state standards that we are assigned. When it comes to our classified staff, our paraprofessionals, they're severely underpaid. And oftentimes they're not paid during the summers, but because of the precarity of work, they can't always find that second job. So we have people who are stressed out as adults working with students with sometimes trauma backgrounds, and they're underpaid. Oftentimes there's this concern about students who aren't meeting certain standards, And so I agree that we should be pigeonholing students into one shape, so to speak. But that's why getting rid of some of the unnecessary testing structures was actually a benefit. It gives, in particular, English, math, and science teachers more time to actually let the students develop themselves. A quick story on when it comes to what education, I think, and what most teachers and citizens would agree with. I had a student do a project-based learning assignment. Project-based learning is where the student, with the teacher as a guide, following state standards, Common Core curriculum, explore a topic of their own interest. And this student was quite conservative in leaning in his political leanings. And he chose to read about Ronald Reagan. And then he chose, with some guidance, oh, why don't I read about this liberal president? And then on the student's own volition, he went out and interviewed the local Democrats, interviewed the local Republicans, and got in conversations with all of them. And he made an amazing project, all student directed, teacher guided, following those standards that make him ready for college life or civic life. I would hope that we would agree that that's the kind of education standard that we want, not this movement to ban books, to ban thinking. And that is a little alarming to me as a teacher. And the concern, what we're not talking about is this concern of gay and lesbian students being able to learn about themselves and develop themselves. And I'm supposed to stop. I would just end with that. I hope that we protect the right to learn. Thank you.
Well, you know, I understand clapping. I like to clap too, but we really got to be pretty careful not to if we can. Because anyway, at the end, we can clap as much as we want for everybody. The third question, what state action will you take to implement the limits on campaign contributions and expenditures that Oregon voters approved in 2020? The first speaker is Jonathan Chenjeri.
Thank you. Oregon has been called the Wild West of campaign finance reform for quite a while. And when the measure was passed in recent years, the question was, great, it's passed, now how do we actually implement it? And we see that across the nation, statewide, we see the cost of elections going up, and often who are pushed out are the standard parties like third parties, but also candidates that may not have the political capital or the wealth to make it to that position. So when it comes to campaign finance, there's some things we can do. The ORSTAR system, ORSTAR is the Oregon campaign finance system that I've become more accustomed to, and I'm sure you have as well. It's actually quite transparent when it comes to where you're getting your donations, your dollars. Where we can do some work is be clear on what campaign contributions to be spent on, notably while you're in office. There are cases of politicians buying personal newspaper subscriptions with campaign donations. We should ask about the ethics there. We should revisit questions about public financing of elections. That was put forward a few years ago, but kind of put to the side just due to the effectiveness of it. And we should create a system where minor parties should be able to have a stronger voice on the debate stage. Patrick Starnes was an independent voice for governor, but the way the financial system works, he was simply not going to make it very far. There are third-party groups that are interested in the name's eluding me right now, but the first past the post type of system that you see in other countries and states. These are all important debates that I would say we do need fundamentally to rein in where these campaign contributions are coming from and how candidates can spend that. And ultimately have the question of how we can widen the net of those who can run for office. So I'll leave my comments there.
I have been surprised at running this campaign, how hard it's been, and how much it's cost. And we don't even have that big of a campaign in our district. So So Jonathan's right. The ORSTAR is very transparent. You know, you have a 30-day filing period, a 7-day filing period, and then a 2-day filing period. Everything you spend on your campaign, if you are following the rules, has to be put into ORSTAR. So you have to, I have a treasurer. I wasn't smart enough to figure out the ORSTAR quite yet. It overwhelmed me. And so I just said no. So I have a treasurer that I'm so grateful for. And I'm making my husband be my treasurer next. So, but every receipt, every donation, every expenditure, I send to my treasurer, she puts it into ORSTAR. But I do that because I'm honest. Not everybody does that. That's kind of a reigning theme in the state, is we need a really good accountability system. One thing that we could do that was brought up, I had this discussion this afternoon, is that we could actually say that any campaign contribution that you receive has to come from your district, from your constituents. You don't take outside money from any other place. So no lobby money, no outside of the state money, no money from anywhere except from the people in your district. That makes the campaign a little bit more honest, where you're getting your money. You're not getting Nike money. You're not getting money from wherever you might be getting money from. You don't get lobby money. Lobby money is a huge deal in campaigns. I'm all about this being based on the character of the person and not based on how much money they can raise. Because there's a lot of people out there that can raise a lot of money, and you wouldn't want them to be watching your children in the afternoon. So this is a big conversation, and one that I think we need to look at. Integrity should be a character quality that each of our politicians possess. And we should want people to know where our money is coming from, how we're spending it, and what we're going to do with it. So anything that we can do in that regard and hold the system accountable, I'd be willing to look at it.
Thank you. So hopefully the comments you've heard so far have encouraged you to write a question. We have questions here, and then this meeting is also, as you see, being run on a Zoom call so that people in Klamath Falls can see it as well. And they have an opportunity also to ask questions. So if you have your 3x5 card, you give them to Barbara or to Mary Lou, and they're just going to check through them to make sure that we make sense and that we can read your handwriting. So the first question I have, will you commit not to walk out of state legislative sessions and stay to work things out? So let's see, Emily finished, so Jonathan Chenjeri goes first on that one.
Yeah, I was looking at measure 113. It was one of the measures that I was actually thinking about a bit more seriously. And I think, yes, I would commit to not walking out, largely because this is what our job is. We're assigned to do a job, and I understand the strategy behind it. If you are the minority party and you feel that you're being clamped down by the dominant party, that the only strategy you have is to walk out. Though it seems that we could be more effective for our communities and more effective at bringing some results back by staying and fighting it out the right way rather than leaving the system. So yes, I would commit to not walk out.
I did mention that we have the candidates have 2 minutes for these questions. So Emily.
For the last 10 years, we've had single party rule in the legislature. That means that they can pass whatever they would like to pass without any Republican voting. And the only recourse that the Republican Party had was to walk out. Whereas I'm not going to commit an absolute yes or no on that, because there's some things in my moral compass that if they came up and I had absolutely no choice except to walk out, I would take it. But my heart wants to stay and have the conversation, but it can't be one-sided. One story that I love to tell, that my dad told me, and he said if you walked by a burning daycare, because we're pro-life, so if you walked by a burning daycare and you knew you couldn't save all the babies, but you could save one or two, would you do it? Or would you let them burn? I'd save as many babies as I could. I'd save as many of you as I could. So I can't commit to you that I won't walk out if I don't feel that it's absolutely necessary, but I commit to you that I will save as many people as I can before that is my absolute last option.
Thank you. The next question is a little longer. What is your understanding of tribal rights, treaty rights, and the Endangered Species Act as they pertain to the Klamath Basin water crisis? So we began with Emily last time. So Jonathan?
Our area in Klamath Basin has an ongoing question and debate over the water rights with the Klamath tribes. The Endangered Species Act, these tribal governments, pardon me, these are recognized treaties by the federal government. And thus, a lot of these treaties have rights that supersede a lot of local questions. And so when it comes to the Endangered Species Act, this is the federal law that localities are obligated to follow. And in doing so, what we do is, one, we follow the law and we uphold a fundamental respect for a lot of these tribes that are here. So that understanding at the local level becomes complicated because you have these different interests at the local level that feel as though they're being put upon by the federal government and the state governments in cases. And yet in not following them, we actually make a lot of our collective issues worse. So what we need to do is have leadership that's willing to work with the federal level to bring these meetings with the different stakeholders together to work on approaching these issues. One thing we can do is build upon meetings that took place last summer, I believe, between the Secretary of the Interior at the federal level, Klamath farmers, and the tribes to slowly build that relationship. And those treaties, which have, they're the first rights of the land, they need to be approached in such a way that the land itself can be approached. And with that, I think the best thing we can do is move on in that team fashion. So all in there.
This also needs more than 2 minutes. I have spent the last 9 months learning about this, and I still sometimes feel like my head's gonna explode with everything that's going on over there. So the Klamath Basin, the way that it rolls is basically from the top to the bottom. The geographical makeup of that land is the water starts up here and it ends down in Northern California in the Tule Lake area. That's why in 1905, the federal government came in and they made the projects, the Klamath Reclamation Project, and they created an irrigation district. So they built a dam for Klamath Lake and they built it up high enough to store water specifically used for irrigation. I'm not going to deny that I feel that the tribes there were taken advantage of years ago. And I think that just in general, Native Americans were probably not treated as humanely as they could have been and should have been in hindsight now that we look back. And so I understand where they're coming from and wanting to protect what has been precious to them. But let's talk now about the makeup and the chemistry of that lake. It's a shallow lake, it's a warm lake. So the ESA is for two sucker fish, they're mud dwelling fish. And the problem is that these fish are not spawning, they're not being able to live. They live 40 or 50 years and they're not being able to make it past their juvenile life. And so there's also a lot of predators in the lake. There's fish and birds that eat the fish. There's fish and birds that eat the sucker fish. So they really just have everything is racked up against them. It's also racked up against them because we keep that lake, all that extra water in that lake. We're not draining it out for irrigation for the farmers and then having fresh lake water coming in. So it's parasite city, which all of these suckers that end up getting caught are treated for parasites at it's not a hatchery, but it's a fishery actually that's located in southern Klamath. So I agree though. I would love to see the KBRA, which is a whole nother conversation that happened several years ago where everyone sat at the table and they made an agreement and it went to the federal government. And then our federal government changed hands and it didn't go through. I would like to see that happen again. And I'm sorry.
For both of you, I have a few questions that are aimed at just one of the candidates. So we may go back and forth on those. This is for both candidates though. What impact do you see that teachers' unions have on the ability for an educator to do their job? So we start with Emily.
So I don't even know where to start with this. Our current union president is sitting in the office and I love her. So, and I sit on the board. I was the chair last year, I'm the vice chair this year, and it's a contract negotiation year. I absolutely support and love our teachers and our classified staff. And I absolutely believe that they should be paid and respected for the job that they do. It is a tough job. And in our district, we work hard to make sure that their pay and their wage and their benefits is competitive. And there's things in their contract that I'm not going to talk about right now that I would like to see changed for their benefit. However, I also don't think that it should be a weapon that's used against a school district in striking or in trying to manipulate in some way. The why of a school district should be about children and helping children reach their absolute best. It shouldn't be about whatever a teacher is wanting at that time or whatever a district is wanting at that time. It should be a compromise between the two parties. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave it there.
So this is to both candidates. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, Jonathan hasn't answered yet.
So the question is, how do unions hold back teachers or help teachers? Is that I just want to get the question correct.
So what impact do you see that teachers union have on the ability for an educator to do their job?
Thank you. So the union is made up of teachers. The union starts at the school level where you have a building rep that you can go to with contract issues, questions in the classroom about students' needs, questions about how you're being treated by the administration. So it is a democratic process from bottom to top, not a top-down process. So for unions to be benefiting the teacher, the unions are what allow oftentimes the teacher to continue to work. If they're facing some discrimination of any kind or cause for firing is often the question. These are the issues that come up. The teachers' unions are not there necessarily to funnel money towards side projects or inherently political concerns. They're there to defend the teacher. So the question is a little bit interesting to me because the union is made up of teachers. So oftentimes their interests are the ones that are being funded and pushed forward. Thanks.
Thank you. This next question is also for both candidates. So we'll start with Jonathan Chenjeri. Are you committed to voting along party lines?
Not necessarily. There are times where, for instance, when the minimum wage was passed, we had a vote that put rural areas at a second-tier position to urban areas, which make a higher wage. That would set back the people who would be voting for me or voting for Ms. McIntire. So that would be something I could not be on board with. There are times when some of my party might engage with, this has happened at the university level, with some possible restrictions on curriculum and books. We thought was for the better to put this regulation out there. That's something I would not agree with, going back to this question of First Amendment and education. So there are cases where I wouldn't necessarily fall in line with my party. It's though on the whole, I'm pressed to say what policies the Democrats are putting out that wouldn't actually benefit these rural areas. What we need is representation that would bring back those benefits to us.
I think I would reference my earlier story about saving as many as I could. Politics shouldn't be 100% my way or the highway, or 100% your way or the highway. It should be a 50% split. Nobody should be 100% happy, because that means then that everybody is having equal representation. And so, no, I'm not going to tell you to be 100% my party line. I'm going to be 100% for my community and for this state and what I believe is going to be the best for Oregonians going forward.
Thank you. So Emily, we have a question for you in particular. The person writes, my great-granddaughter is 10 years old. She was raped and is now pregnant. Should she be able to get an abortion?
I'm sorry. I'm just really sorry. I thought about this question a lot. Not this specific one, but just about abortion and in general. And yes, I know it's all about life and the baby, but more about than that, I mean, that's huge. It's also about the woman carrying the baby. And we don't talk about what happens during an abortion, after abortion, how you feel when you find out you're pregnant, all the emotions that go into that. The women that sit in this room, how much do you love your annual exam? So let's talk about stuff like that. Going in for an abortion at 10, having to lay on that table, having something done to your body that's not natural, already going through the trauma of what you've experienced to have another trauma. Women's bodies were designed to have babies. And I'm heartbroken for that 10-year-old, because that is not a life that she chose. But to do two wrongs to make a right, I don't see how that's helping anybody. So I think we need to look at abortion in a different way. This isn't just about saving the baby. This is about saving the mental, emotional, social health of the woman as well, and doing everything we can to support them where they're at. So, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Actually, if you would like to respond to that as well.
Yeah, I think this is an issue we should take somewhat seriously, because the woman's body was, yes, designed to become pregnant, but also designed to be an independent individual with a mind of their own. So I would think that we shouldn't, not everything should be political in the sense that I should have a vote on what you do with your body. There are some fundamental things that don't always necessarily that need to be left up to the vote of everybody. So I would think that a fundamental question of your choice with your medical needs, with your reproductive care, that's not something that I should necessarily have a voice in, or someone for mine. So I would say we need to certainly defend these rights at the state level, because right now that's really what we have. Thank you.
Please, we're not discussing it here. The next question. What is your position on term limits? So would you like to start, Emily?
I have no problem with term limits.
I agree.
So that. So this question is aimed at Jonathan. They write, in an interview with KBOO, is that a station I don't know about? You described yourself as a self-described socialist. What exactly is a described socialist?
Thank you. Yeah, I prefer the term socialist over progressive or democratic socialist because I think politically identifying myself as a socialist allows me to have a conversation beyond just should we raise taxes or lower taxes. Because that is an appropriate conversation. Taxes can be regressive and too little taxes doesn't always account for what's left out of the standard market model. So for me, the socialist approach to economics would be a cooperative approach where you can have markets. There's nothing anti-socialist about markets or anti-market about socialists. It's how you arrange those markets. How much power do we want to concentrate in one individual enterprise? Why should public utilities like water, heating, why should that be left up to a private sector who can choose to not invest in rural areas, can choose to price gouge all they want? So those regions that have experienced a kind of geographic divide are structurally left out. If the market model worked all the time, 100%, it would already be doing it. So I think it's appropriate to have a more nuanced conversation about maintaining access and opportunity and democracy and choice inside a structure that's cooperative. And so we can still have all those debates about taxes or wages or what have you, but it happens within a system that is structurally more fair. That's my response.
Would you like to respond to that, Emily?
I guess I've never really heard socialism described like that. Socialism, by definition, is that we give all of our money to the government and the government gives us what we need. I personally am for a capitalistic society. It shows that people work hard for what they get and they get to keep what they get, and we pay our taxes to the government, and that's how our city and state and federal officials are run. But when you have 10 people in a group and you say, go work, and well, let's see, I'm gonna, if you have everybody working and 2 people sit out and they don't work and they get the same amount of pay as everybody that was working, what do you think everybody in the group that's working tomorrow is gonna do? They're gonna work less, and then they're gonna work less, and then they're gonna work less, and then they're gonna work less. And actually, I think that this was in the founding of our forefathers when we first started. They all worked, they all farmed, they put in their food into a collective community group, and they took food from that collective group. Well, the farmers were realizing that there were some people that weren't working, they were just taking the food. And so then they almost, I don't know how fast it was, but they redecided that what you work for was what you got to keep. And guess what? Everybody worked. And so I don't know how a socialistic economy is going to make us benefit in any possible way. I think that people should be rewarded for hard work. They should get to keep what they earn, and that we should pay our taxes accordingly.
The next question is to both of you. What is your position on measure 114? I believe that's the one about guns, right? Who wants to go first? Jonathan should go first.
Measure 114 would create mandatory background checks, would require someone like myself to have training and a permit to obtain a firearm, and would regulate the kind of or the amounts and form of ammunition that I can own as an individual. I would think that responsible gun owners, some of my friends and colleagues, would support a measure like that. Similar to driving a car, I shouldn't be able to just do that without some type of background and training. So for me, I don't come from a family that hunts. I don't come from a family that did that for sport. It wasn't part of my childhood, but I have empathy with those that do. A lot of them are my friends. And in building that empathy, I see all of the work and care and the financial obligations that go into getting permits and licenses and dealing with the quotas and all of this. That being said, a firearm is inherently different than other forms of hobbies. So having some type of background check is legitimate, and I would support Measure 114.
So I'm against Measure 114. I do recognize, I actually talked about this in church this morning, which was great. You know, and I hadn't really thought about it. You know, people want to do gun control laws for safety, right? We want to protect the innocent. And I can understand that. I can get behind that. Measure 114, and after having heard from law enforcement and stuff, is going to be an unenforceable measure for our law enforcement. They're already understaffed, underfunded, can't keep people on there working. And now we're going to put more regulations on them for how they have to give extra classes. They have to be doing all of these extra things. And what it's going to do is it's going to be making most of the people in here that own guns felons. And the people in here that own guns are probably 99.9% responsible gun owners. And that's the thing that we don't talk about. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. If we want to say that guns kill people, then rocks kill people, knives kill people, cars kill people, fires kill people. That's where we're going. It's our Second Amendment right to bear arms. And it's the only thing that keeps the government from being able to come in here with their arms and take over our homes. And where we might not be right there right now, if we take away our Second Amendment rights, even this chipping away, which is what this state does, it chips away real good. We're going down that path. So I am a no on 114.
Did you want a rebuttal? Yeah, certainly. You have 1 minute. Both sides.
So I'm learning the rules as we go. It seems as though that's something of a slippery slope argument, and I tend to hear that only when it comes to gun control. We don't normally think of that with driving. I think most of us in here would agree that there should be some rules of the road with something as dangerous and lethal as a car could be, although it's not typically used as a weapon. But I wonder, is it more fear mongering to say that a regulation on a gun or who can use a gun, if it's people that kill people, should that person have some type of background in it? So that's my question. Can I ask a question? A rebuttal informed question?
Go ahead.
Okay.
There are background checks to purchase guns. There are background checks. That's already happening. And to have a concealed weapons permit, you have to take a class and you have to get your license from the state and you have to have a background check. So there already are those things happening.
Did you have another rebuttal to that?
As an individual in Oregon, I wouldn't have to go through certain hurdles as someone without a background with a gun to obtain that. So they're having some regulatory system would help.
I think we'll just have to decide. If you rebut me, I'll just stop. How about that? Okay? Because we won't agree on this. This is just where we're going to get. We're not going to agree. I'm going to be fundamentally for our Second Amendment rights. And I think Jonathan's probably going to be fundamentally wherever he is at. Okay? And that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. But I can tell you that I feel a lot safer in this room right now knowing where I'm at. Because I'm pretty sure there's probably 3 or 4 concealed weapons in this room right now. And I am so grateful. Because if there was somebody with an illegal firearm and they came in here, I know we'd be safe.
Thank you. So the next question to both of you, it was actually addressed to Jonathan, but since there's several questions on this subject, I'm going to go ahead and just address it to both. Do you support the CDC's COVID recommendation vaccines for children. So do you want to start, Jonathan?
If the CDC, which is usually a panel of accredited, peer-reviewed scientists who put out research that's peer-reviewed, yeah, that would be probably appropriate. Far more appropriate than me as a parent or an uncle making a decision based on an assumption or one article that I read for my child. I would be far more confident in the medical team to put that out. So yes, I would support that.
I'm not going to make anybody feel bad that wants to go and get a vaccine or that doesn't want to go and get a vaccine. I believe if you want to vaccinate yourself or your children, that you should go ahead and have the right to do that. But I also believe that if you do not want to vaccinate yourself or your children, you should not be forced to vaccinate yourself and your children. That is not something that I believe that we should be being told to do by the government.
This question is to both people. What is the biggest issue Salem and Portland politicians don't understand about Southern Oregon issues? Yeah, Emily goes first.
Well, I kind of think much of what Jonathan's been saying here. People in Portland don't come down here. They don't know that we exist. And though I would fundamentally disagree with spending more dollars, just because I think we spend too many dollars, I think that our voice isn't heard. If you look at the makeup of our state and the counties, and even like, so just, I'm gonna give you a little quick school board thing. We have an OSBA, it's our Oregon School Board Association. It's the entire state, and it's the only way that an Oregon school board can get insurance coverage for their school district is they're members of OSBA. OSBA is made up of a board, and the board is represented by the different school districts around the state. OSBA restructured their districting, and so they put emphasis on how many kids are in a district versus the districts or the geographic areas. So currently we have Eastern Oregon, like the top northeast quadrants, about 36 school districts have one board member. And then it goes down, they have one board member. There's from Klamath over to the coast is one board member represented by OSBA. And then it goes up the west side as well. And we've got like 20, 30 school districts being represented by one board member at the OSBA. And then we move into Portland, Multnomah, Clackamas, Salem, and they've got 3 members for like 6 school districts. So when OSBA sits and they decide what their legislative session is going to be about, it's by about 15 members that are coming out of Portland, Salem, Eugene, and then about 5 members that are on the outskirts of it. So whose voice do you think gets heard? So we need to make sure that our voice, the entire voice of Oregon, is being heard, not just that urban population.
Well, the question is about what's maybe not understood up north about down here in rural Oregon. And oftentimes the politics is a little different. Just spatially, they're dealing with different issues. The policing and law enforcement issue is a good example. We have something of a different relationship with law enforcement in our smaller regions. So conversations about defunding the police may not always either make sense or be the most appropriate for our region. And sometimes the headline politics up north tends to capture what that is. Also, it seems as though sometimes it's not always understood the kind of isolation that's experienced in rural areas. What I mean by that is just the distance over the hill to bring goods, to have access to hospitals, maternity care, child care. Some of those things aren't always taken into account. So it's assumed that simply passing legislation to say do this, therefore the rural areas can't accomplish that without the resources in advance. That's why our campaign wants to talk a lot about infrastructure and building that in the first place. So that way, if there are good ideas in Portland, and sometimes there are great ideas, we can actually work on them here. The broadband issue is another good example. We don't always get those basic needs to reach areas of Shady Cove or Klamath Falls. But without the funding, without the leadership in Salem to actually bring that back. So even if in terms of population and representation, we don't always match in numbers, we have someone willing to work on that team to bring some of those resources back. So until we talk about the geographic isolation and the kind of class disparities that rural areas face, I think it's much harder to talk about a unified conversation. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. As citizens, how do you instill confidence in our Constitution when we have what seems to be attempts to undermine our democratic institutions? Emily?
So I've actually been taking a class. It's called the Patriot Academy, and we've been going through the Constitution. And I just watched a movie called Monumental with Kirk Cameron. And there's actually a monument in Boston. It's our founding fathers created it. It's so cool. I'm actually think I'm going to order one for my office. But it's this huge statue that sits in the middle of a cul-de-sac, which is really lucky for the people that surround this monument. But I'm all about upholding our foundation. Our forefathers were purposeful when they created this nation. They created it to make sure that the voice of the underserved could be heard. They created it to make sure that everyone was treated and known to be equal. They created it so we could maintain our freedoms, our religious freedoms, our medical freedoms, our educational freedoms, our right to bear arms and own property, our right to work hard and keep our money, our potential to be able to be truly, like we tell our kids, anything they want to be. If you want to work for it, go for it. I am all about making sure that we maintain our Constitution and where it's at. It would have to be a pretty extreme thing for me to vote to make a change to our Constitution. And yeah, there you go.
Well, when it comes to the Constitution, it seems much of that tends to be a story about the Constitution. Little to none of those things are in the Constitution. It took about 100 years for poor white men to be fully able to vote. It wasn't until the 1960s that African Americans, pardon my speech, were able to vote. So there are a lot of issues with the Constitution. It's also a fundamental document and creates a fundamental system where I am able to say, I'm a socialist, or what identity you want to have. I'm able to speak that on a street corner. So the fundamental principles of our democracy, which is to be able to vote, choose the candidates you want to have or don't want to have, the ability to not be searched by the police without a warrant, to not have the federal government impose on states when not appropriate, but also to protect the right of individuals when the state supersedes your personal rights. Those are all in the Constitution. I find it sometimes alarming when my friends on the right are imposing on law a kind of religious identity. That's fundamentally opposed to what the Constitution is talking about. I find that personally quite alarming. The fundamental aspect of our Constitution, the framework, is that we have a pluralistic society where we have differences. We have Christians, we have Muslims, we have atheists. We have those without religious affiliation, and some who just want to go to work and go home at the end of the day. Our Constitution does not say you have to fall in line with a certain ideology. And in upholding the Constitution, I think this is an example of what we have to maintain, which is disagreements in a way that's civil, without saying that my religious freedom means you have to allow me to feel free. In a free society, I am free from religion. I'm free to speak my mind. So in those ways, I would try to uphold the Constitution that we have. Thank you.
So I would beg to differ just fundamentally. I do absolutely believe with my whole heart that the Constitution was founded on Christ. And I believe that there are documents after documents where he's referenced. And this state, which again, this is longer than a minute that I need. You guys just need to watch the movie Monumental. But those pilgrims did that voyage across the sea because they believed there was a God who created them to not be under a kingship rule, but under the rule of God, their creator. And the documents that are created in the Constitution and surrounding the Constitution will support that. So.
Sure. 1 minute.
Respectfully, what documents are those? Because I'm fairly certain that the framers of the Constitution, writing in an age where they were actually quite radical, many were opposed to the church in many ways, many were following Enlightenment philosophy, which is incredibly critical of faith and religion as a way to solve problems. I mean, these were creatures of a time that said we should use reason to solve problems and not specifically look back to one book. So I feel that this is a pertinent issue because I'm concerned when one religious ideology seeks to shape law with an incorrect understanding of the history. That I find to be a bit alarming.
Jonathan has a one up on me because he's a history teacher. So he does this all the time. Knows history really well, that's what I was saying. So I just watched this movie, so I'm not going to sit here and claim to tell you document after document specifically tells you. I can tell you that Kirk Cameron can tell you in the movie Monumental. And I can tell you that the monument that's in Massachusetts is super tall and it has faith in the center pointing up. And surrounding faith is justice, law, mercy. There's another one. And they're based, and I apologize, because again, you don't know what questions you're gonna get asked, and I just watched this movie a week ago, I didn't memorize it. But come to my office and I'll have a monument in my office, we can go through it. But I would fundamentally disagree with you on that. The other thing that I would say is, the Bible bases its golden rule, love your neighbor as yourself. I don't know why we would be upset or be worried about that being the law or the foundation of one of the biblical foundations of the Bible is loving your neighbor as yourself, love God and love each other as yourself. So I don't know where that would be a religious fight. I would think that most people would agree that it would be best to treat others how you want to be treated and love your neighbor as yourself.
So in that same vein, though, we have a question. The uppermost concern of mine is the character of political debate in our nation and the deep divide it engenders. Do you know of efforts to address this issue locally, regionally, or nationally? So we'll start with Jonathan.
The character of our debate, our political debate. I'm sorry, that was the question.
So do you know of efforts to address this issue, that is political divide, locally, regionally, or nationally? I can read the whole question over
No,
again.
that's, yeah, I
Okay.
understand. Yes, there's a few layers to this. There are some local organizations, some are Braver Angels is a more moderate group that attempts to bring the left and right, so to speak, together to have dialogue. I've talked to them. I'm usually pretty open to talk to anybody as long as it's, you know, reasonable and we can actually sit down and talk. I appreciate Ms. McIntire sitting today for the debate. Obviously, we disagree. But I think beyond the ability just to talk, you know, and be friends, I think we need to have a conversation about the information that we have as a society and a kind of self-education, as it were, because all of us, I'm sure, follow the news to a degree, but there's little regard for how those sources of information are presenting themselves. I don't like the term regulation, but if you're going to say a professional journalist is echoing something. There used to be something called the fairness doctrine. And the fairness doctrine in the 80s, early 90s said you had to have a fair interpretation of both sides, or 3 or 4 sides, whatever it is, without biasing one side in an extravagant way. And that was removed in the 1990s. And it allowed, in particular, the far right, not so much the left, but the far right, to explode with a kind of personality politics, this conspiracy theory laden type of politics. And I'm very concerned with my friends on the right, who I respect. Some of them are my coworkers or colleagues or neighbors down the street. The kind of information that we're getting to have a debate in the first place seems to be coming from a place of misinformation, sometimes intentional misinformation from people with access and power. So I think we need to reflect for ourselves, you all, myself, where am I getting my information? Is it peer reviewed? Am I respecting myself in getting this information, even if I don't like it? Thank you.
Do you have would you like to speak to that too, Evelyn?
Oh, sure. Yes, Bravers Angels is a group that has been trying to bring both sides together to be able to have a conversation. Man, it's a bummer how divided we are. It is just a bummer. And I honestly don't know how to bring 2 sides together. They can literally sit and say, I don't have to win this 100%, and have the other side say the same thing and truly believe it and get down to some bipartisan politics, because we're not there. Jonathan and I can sit here, but we're not currently legislators, but I'm not sure how much either one of us is necessarily going to change each other's mind. And we have to be willing. I want to be willing. You got to hear what the other side is saying. You have to understand where they're coming from. People don't get passionate about things because they don't have a why and they don't care. They get passionate because they have a why and they care and they believe it with their whole being. And we need more people that are willing to say, I want to listen to you and hear you and work with you and try to get to the middle. I don't know that we're there, but I pray that we are. And I hope everybody in this room is praying that we are, because that's what we need if we want to see some good, positive things happen in this state and in this country.
So this was addressed to Emily, but Mr. Chenjeri can also respond if he wants to. Do you have the same opinion for polio, measles, all vaccines mandated by state and federal government? I
Yes,
assume they're referring back to.
I'm assuming you're meaning,
COVID.
is it a choice? Should you have a choice? Yes, and you do have a choice. You do have a choice to vaccinate your children or to not vaccinate your children. You fill out a form at the doctor's office, a religious exemption, or you're just not doing it. Actually, Ashland is one of our highest counties of unvaccinated children in this entire state, because they don't want anything going into their kids that's not organic and natural. So I am fully about free choice on medical care on that one, so on vaccinations.
Should vaccines be mandated, as all their vaccines? No, not every vaccine should be mandated. There are some basic ones. I think polio is a good example where I believe, go to many institutions, you need to have that vaccine. About 50 years ago, it was pretty common to know somebody who knew somebody who contracted polio. And with that vaccine, we're able to save millions of lives. So one, I think clearly we need to do a better job of articulating what a vaccine is, when vaccines are appropriate and when they could reasonably be optional. But if the question is, should all vaccines be mandatory? No. But are there some that do some basic, essential, and very helpful things for infants and young people? Yeah, I would think those, there is a place for that.
So I'm going to make this our last question, and then we'll have a chance, you'll have a closing remarks as well. What are your thoughts on the corporate activity tax? So we start with Jonathan on that.
For quite a while, the Oregon corporate system had quite a nice ride. They were able to pay $250 or nothing. And with the special activities tax, there is a over 50% tax on certain gross product over $1 million. There's also a 30% or so exemption for wages and other costs. Oregon corporations do quite well, more so than other states. Now, if we're talking about small businesses, and those are different than corporations, one of the great games is to equate, Taco Bell with the family pizza place down the street. They don't have the same power. They don't have the same economic influence. And so to fairly tax and to fairly bring some of that tax benefit back to our region, we should have a gradual tax that takes into account, growth over time and the record profits that many corporations are seeing after COVID. That can help deal with a lot of the financial inequities that we see in rural areas. It can also help approach issues with PERS and retirement programs that continue to be an issue. And with that, hopefully property taxes can also be balanced out. So the corporate activities tax is legitimate, it's fair. And with other forms of tax like the SSA, it's something that possibly even should be expanded. Thank you.
So the purpose of the cat tax, in my mind, so you can tell me if this is in your mind, was to tax the rich. That was the purpose. That the rich were getting rich and the rich needed to be taxed. Well, what happened was the businesses put that tax back on the consumer. So we pay the cat tax. You can actually go to some businesses down here and it's actually a line item on your receipt. It will say cat tax, this percent, and you're paying it. Unfortunately, the cat tax for Klamath put several of their pharmacies out of business. This is not a tax on your take-home income. This is a tax on your total sales for the entire year. So for restaurant owners, your total sales are through the roof, but what you take home is not that. And you're being taxed on your total sales. So there's a lot of benefits to the cat tax. A lot has gone to fund education. In our district, we've gotten like millions of dollars from the cat tax. It goes for trying to help some of these educational discrepancies that we have. There's good things that have happened with that cat tax money. I'm not going to deny that. But when we continue to tax business, we tax ourselves. The businesses in this state pay their taxes. They already have to pay their taxes. And what this does, when we all say shop local, when we tax those businesses, we put those shop local businesses out of business. And the only people that can stay here are the big corporations, which is what everybody talks badly about. So we have to look at this in a different way. There has to be another way that we can do this. I don't know, maybe don't spend so much. That could be one. But when we tax businesses, we pay that. That's our payment.
So my understanding with the pharmacies issue is that these were a lot of Rite Aids and other corporate chains that didn't have the incentive to remain in these rural areas. That's part of that problem of access in these areas. So the cat tax was a part of that, but it's also the unwillingness to continue that investment in these areas. And that's pretty common when you also don't have the consumer base, those consumers which are spending their wages to then spend that money. So it creates this circular system where rural areas continue to be left out of the economic development equation statewide.
Did you want to respond again, Emily?
Real fast, because cat tax, and we're talking wages and all that stuff. So our current minimum wage in the state is $15. I know that's not what our state says, but that's how much it costs pretty much now to get anybody to come and work for you. It's $15 an hour. And it's actually more if you really want to have somebody come and work with you. And you have to offer a bonus, which you're actually not allowed to do anymore. So when we raise wages, when we raise taxes, it creates inflation, which is where we're at. It costs more for all of our costs of goods, all of our groceries. That's what happens. And actually in Klamath Basin, which is a huge agricultural farming community, and when you look across the country, there's a lot of farming and ag. And because of our overregulation of taxes and wage, we are not able to be competitive in our market for agriculture, because they can go to a state that has less regulation and a lower wage, and they're able to make a larger profit in that agricultural business than they are in Klamath, and it puts the people in Klamath out of business because they can't afford it. They can't afford to do the ag overtime. They can't afford to pay more for hay. They can't afford to not have water. They can't afford to pay for fertilizer that's gone through the roof. They can't afford to pay for the diesel. They can't afford to pay for all of the things that we're charging extra in this state that other states aren't paying, and it's putting them out of business.
Okay. So we'd like to give the candidates 1 minute each to talk about what they'd like to see happen this year, and thank them also for their coming over from Klamath Falls and showing up today live and talking to us all. So Emily, can you start?
Sure. I just want to thank you guys again for putting this on. This was really great. And I'm here for you. I'm your advocate, I'm your representative, and I expect you to hold me accountable. That is your inalienable right as a citizen, and that is where you have your power. You are Caesar in America, and it's your job to hold your elected officials accountable. And if you don't like what we're doing, it's your job to find somebody that you do like and to vote them in. And we've done a really bad job at that over the last couple of years. And it's time for us to take a stand and to really just be voting back for our freedoms. And I also sincerely hope that we can have some bipartisan politics in Salem, that we can have a 30-30 split in the House that will require us to work together. It will make us do it. And that's what we need. We don't need a heavy one side or the other. We need a split that's equal, that causes everyone to have an equal voice.
Thank you, Emily. And Jonathan?
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being on stage. This campaign is about organizing for 10 years from now. We're trying to think about long-term development rather than short-term gain. And with that, we can have a situation in which we can all come to this more often. We can demand debates from our local representatives. We can demand that all stakeholders, from tribes to farmers, to small business owners, to managers, unions, can make collective decisions. And we can do so under conditions where everyone has equitable access to health care. We can do so where those without a home now 10 years out can be on their way to some independence. But to think that we can do it all by ourselves locally through tax cuts, that's simply not going to work. Because if it would have, if it does work, it would have happened already. I think together we can do better. I think together we can develop a positive, inclusive politics that embraces diversity, that embraces difference, and upholds fundamental principles of democracy and builds a brighter future for tomorrow. So thank you.
So now's your chance to clap. Please. I want to thank the people from Catalyst who come up from Ashland to run the sound system so that Zoom could work today and people were able to call in with some questions. And I want to encourage you to go to Vote 411, put your address in, and it'll tell you exactly what's going to be on your ballot. In case there's a few of the races you may not even know that you have to vote on. So you should be getting your ballots this week. Okay? Thank you. Anders, thank you, Anders.
Oh, just let me.